Hello, and welcome to part 3 of the Liberated Hearts Self Love Bootcamp. For part 3 of the bootcamp, we will discuss and tackle self forgiveness. This is Denitra, your emotional wellness coach. For part 3, we will be working on the following: opening yourself to grace, releasing yourself from the guilt of past mistakes, and allowing self-forgiveness to heal and mend the wounds that hinder self-love. Let's begin. What does it mean to have self-forgiveness, and what does it entail? Self-forgiveness is the action of eliminating and resolving those feelings of anger and resentment towards oneself for an offense, flaw, or mistake. By doing so, you open yourself to grace. And by doing so, you also begin to see yourself as God or your Creator sees you and can embrace yourself wholeheartedly and with unconditional love. So self-forgiveness is essential for self-healing. When you dwell on past decisions you've made, it only allows those decisions to keep defining you. By practicing self-forgiveness, you free yourself from the self-defeating energy of resentment. Your past mistakes are meant to guide you, not define you. When you find it hard to forgive yourself, you keep reliving the moment that you made your mistake, which is pretty much self-sabotage. So, self-forgiveness releases you from the guilt of past mistakes. When we live in regret and unforgiveness, it causes us to believe that the mistake we made has enough power to cut us off from God. In reality, God has accepted us wholeheartedly, even in our imperfections. This is the place that we want to connect with in our conscious minds so that we are able to connect to whole, unconditional love. God's love is always available to us when we align ourselves with it. I believe that from the viewpoint of God that there are no mistakes. Mistakes are a way to guide us down the correct path. That is where our free will comes in, and we have to make a decision about continuing to behave a certain way or choosing to do something different. When we are not able to forgive ourselves by the law of attraction, we draw to us the circumstances that reflect our assessment of ourselves. So not forgiving yourself damages your relationships with others because they will also find it difficult to forgive you. Guilt and shame are low energy emotions that only function to keep us in a dark place. Guilt is one of the hardest emotions to deal with. Most of the time, what we try to do is we try to run away from the thought of whatever it is that causes us to feel guilty. What we're actually doing when we do this is we're burying that feeling into our subconscious. Many times our emotions are what actually led us to do whatever it is that we now feel like we need forgiveness for. So essentially, if we would have taken the time to heal those emotions, we would maybe have never made the mistake in the first place. Once you can practice self-awareness and become aware of the reasons why you do what you've done or why you've done what you've done, it is then that you'll be able to begin the process of self-forgiveness. That will require you to examine your emotions regarding why you did what you did and apply it to self-forgiveness. The cycle of unforgiveness causes a burden within us that transforms our energy field to a lower vibration in which we will attract more of those types of circumstances. So allowing self-forgiveness means that we will allow ourselves to heal and to mend the wounds of unforgiveness that hinder self-love. What we want to do is we want to raise our vibration by forgiving ourselves, and that we transform our energy into a higher vibration, and that will attract more loving circumstances and well-being into your life. By being authentic with you today, I can tell you that many of my mistakes from the past were fueled by self love. Now, I know that seems like it's contradictory, but what happened was, and what happens a lot of times, is we actually are looking for ways to show yourself love, but you're unclear on how to do so. When you're unclear on how to show yourself when you're unclear on how to show yourself love, that causes you to look for love possibly in the wrong places. And that could include unemotional eating. That could mean going out and looking for love in different relationships that are not healthy for you. And that is only really an attempt to take care of yourself the only way that you know how in the particular moment. We always have a connection to healing when we tap into our source. When we are holding ourselves hostage by a self-judgment, we keep ourselves from feeling the ability to love. All of our feelings and emotions have a source. Negative feelings are generally the direct result of things that happen to us. And that's one reason why I always make sure I emphasize that you are not your circumstances. You are not what happened to you. You are greater, and you have to believe that you are greater. It is healthy for us to have negative feelings. We all do, but it is unhealthy to hold on to these feelings and suppress them, because that's when it begins to manifest in different areas of your life. So just like self-love, self-forgiveness is a continual process. In order to love ourselves unconditionally, we have to forgive ourselves for the mistakes that we make. Self-forgiveness is a process that will take patience and determination and persistence. There will be many times in your life that you will make mistakes, but hopefully this journey through self-love, and by providing you with information in this boot camp, you will be able to come back to self-forgiveness sooner than you would have maybe before. Be mindful and aware of the thoughts that you have when they arise, and practice self-awareness, and that will allow us to get rid of those negative emotions eventually. So as you can see, self-forgiveness is a necessary step in learning and walking in self-love. Again, we are human and we will make mistakes throughout our lives, and that's what makes self-forgiveness a continual process. But just as we are forgiven and given grace by God, we must extend the same grace to ourselves in order to live happy and free without guilt and shame. Of course, I want to share a quote with you today because I love quotes, and there's a lot of truth in quotes and in the spoken word. One of my favorite poets and writers is Miss Maya Angelou. I probably mentioned that in a previous boot camp video. The quote I want to share with you today is, "If you live, you will make mistakes. It is inevitable. But once you do it, you see the mistake, then you forgive yourself and say, well, if I've known better, I would have done better. That is all." Remember that you make mistakes and you go through things in life, and it comes with experience and things that happens in a certain way. But if you would have known better, you would have done better. And that's when you begin to grow into your power and you're able to embrace self-love and self-healing. We will now start a short guided meditation. Find a quiet place without interruptions and let's begin. Focus on your breathing and have your journal and pen ready to complete your journal exercise. Okay, so here are your journal questions for part 3 of our Liberated Heart Self-Love Bootcamp. You should have received these journal questions by email, or you should have received them in some fashion by now. If you have not, feel free to email me if necessary. Number 1, I want you to think of one thing that is hard for you to forgive, one experience that you have had or one thing that you struggle with for forgiving yourself of. I want you to write that one thing, or if there are multiple things, I want you to write a list of problems or things you have a hard time forgiving yourself of. Number 2, I want you to use the prompt, I struggle with forgiving myself because of blank. And I really want you to focus on connecting with the feelings that you have as you write the things that you struggle forgiving yourself, the things that you feel like you have a hard time forgiving yourself for, and then also why you feel like you struggle with those things. So I feel like I might need to repeat that. Number 1 was list one or more things that is hard for you to forgive yourself of. Number 2 is I struggle with forgiving myself because, and connect with those feelings and write those things down. And number 3 is I believe that I am worthy of forgiveness because I am, and list those things as well. Of course, after you finish your journal entry for the week, I would like for you to email them to me, and I will be following up with you on those. I wanted to share something else with you today at the conclusion of this part of the boot camp. And what I wanted to share with you comes from John 3:16. And it is, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son, so that everyone who believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life. I just want you to know that God has intended for us to have eternal life, and a life that is free of guilt and shame. And he has forgiven us. And again, we need to grant ourselves that grace and learn to forgive ourselves as well. This is Denitra, your emotional wellness coach. I appreciate you taking the time to go through this process, and I look forward to working with you in our next session. Take care.